This is Obsidian, an app that can be used to maintain a knowledge base. And on the right is the InfraNodus GraphView plugin that allows you to extract much better insights from your knowledge base than the native Obsidian GraphView that you can see on the left side of the screen here. Let me show you how this GraphView plugin from InfraNodus works. So first of all, it can visualize high-level ideas for any document or folder. For instance, here I have this folder on the left that's called A2S, visualized using the InfraNodus GraphView plugin, and I can quickly see the main topics inside and how they relate to one another. If I use the native Obsidian plugin, it's quite good because it shows me the pages and connections between them, but it's quite hard to understand what they're about. I have to sort of zoom in and read the specific pages. Here on the right, I can see the topical structure of that folder. I can see which topics are more important because they're bigger on the graph. And then I can zoom into each of those topics in order to see what they're actually about. So for example, here I can see that there is a big cluster on dynamic movement in this folder that is talking about variability of movement. And if I click on those specific topics, I can then click on the context and see which particular statements in that document refer to those concepts that I selected. So it's quite useful to navigate information and to get a high-level overview of the main ideas inside. And it includes very important graph metrics algorithm that allows me to see also which topical clusters are more relevant. It's much more detailed than the native view here on the left. Then also another very important feature of the GraphView from InfraNodus is that it can show me the gaps in my thinking. So for example, if here I have a folder where I'm talking about this project, A2S, I can click on the gaps here and then I can ask InfraNodus to show me what are the gaps in my thinking, which are the topics that could be better connected. And for example, when I find something I like, I can see here, for instance, a gap between cognitive affordances and stress dynamics. I can click here, and then the built-in AI in InfraNodus that, by the way, I can also choose which model it uses. So here it uses Claude Opus 4.6, but you can connect it to any model. And the usage is already included with your InfraNodus account. It can quickly generate an interesting research question that would link these two different clusters together that you can see right now here on the screen. And then if you like, you can actually use the built-in AI chat in order to generate some interesting ideas in relation to this research question that links these two clusters that are not connected. Or you can also open Terminal directly inside your Obsidian Vault and then send this question to Claude and then use Claude, which is also quite good, Claude Code, in order to generate the answers from your knowledge base. So really it allows you to have this high level of flexibility and to find ideas that are not yet connected in order to generate some interesting insights from them. So this is pretty useful and you can use this approach in many different ways. And then if you open again the folder here, you can go to a specific file, for instance, in this case, this one, right click, and then ask InfraNodus to open it in a separate graph. So you can really have a very detailed view of your content and sort of zoom in into the specific folders, files, search results, or files that have bookmarks or tags, and then view them in this way and then generate ideas from them. So now that you have an overview, let me show you how this GraphView from InfraNodus works and how it's different from the native GraphView that you have inside Obsidian, so that you can understand when to use one and when to use the other, and how you can also combine them with AI, and how you can actually extract some interesting insights from these graphs in order to then query built-in AI with some interesting questions. So first of all, the original GraphView in Obsidian visualizes the pages and connections between them. So for example, you see here when you have a page, in radical embodied cognitive science, for instance, here, I have this markup with wikilinks, double brackets. So that means that each page that I mention as a wikilink here will be connected to the main page where I mention this page. And then as a result, this graph is built based on this representation. So when I visualize it as a graph, I will only see the main page and then the connections that it has to other pages. And then where it can become useful is if there is the same page, like for instance here, the node reality is connecting to different pages. So that allows me to see that there is some connection between this main page and that page. And in fact, this is useful, but not so much, because you have to manually tag everything yourself in the text here, you see. And yes, you could launch AI to do that for you, but it's not quite convenient. So most of the time, if you have notes or if you have text, like For instance, here I have some extracts from books that I like to read that were made using Readwise. For example, books here, right? If I try to visualize books inside this plugin of Obsidian, the native one, let's see here, I will say I would like to visualize Readwise books, right? Like it's a very sparse graphs that only has references to the tag and then some kind of book that maybe is connected to the author, and that's it, you know, it's not really a usable graph. Whereas if I right click on that folder and visualize it with InfraNodus, what I'm going to see is actually a graph of all the different excerpts that I made from those books that will show me the main clusters of ideas I'm interested in when I'm reading. You see, there's much more information here. And this is because InfraNodus by default builds this graph in a slightly different way, actually in a very different way than the native Obsidian plugin. So instead of using the wikilinks, it actually visualizes the text itself. So it takes all the text that I have here, let's say, you know, all these highlights, excerpts that I have from this book, from that book, and then it processes words as nodes. So when you go to the concepts view, you can actually see it clearly here. Every word is a node and every co-occurrence of them is the connection between. And if you have wikilinks, it will also treat wikilinks in the same way and combine them with the concept. So you build a very dense graph, which is maybe not as easy to read at first sight as what you see here when you have the Obsidian GraphView, right? Like here, at least you can kind of see the names very easily. But what that allows you to do is to build a network of your information, a real knowledge graph, which then can be processed in a way where you identify the main clusters, where you range the nodes or the concepts by their relative importance, so which of them have higher betweenness centrality in the graph. And all this information allows you to build this very nice representation of the main ideas that will really make sense, because it organizes those ideas in clusters and then uses network metrics in order to identify which idea clusters are the more important ones. So it gives you much better structural insight this way. And on top of that, this is also what allows you to identify the gaps between those different clusters of topics, what we've seen earlier when I was demonstrating how we use the gaps to generate new ideas, right? So by default, this is how InfraNodus visualizes this information. However, I understand that there are some instances where you would like to maintain the same sort of logic for the graph as the native Obsidian GraphView. So in that case, for instance, let's go back to this folder that we had at the beginning, where I do have actually some of the wikilinks visualized. So you see here we have the links and the wikilinks between them. It's exactly those files that we have here. A lot of them, they have these wikilinks inside. Okay, so if we would like to visualize this graph exactly in the same way, what we can do is to go to the settings of InfraNodus GraphView plugin, and here on multi-page processing, we can say that we would like to visualize only wikilinks. Okay, so it will not visualize the text. And then also we can choose how these wikilinks are connected. So by default, they will link to each other if they're mentioned in the same paragraph. And that's very important because sometimes, you know, if you have a text and you mention, for instance, some topics in the same paragraph, like for instance here, I have a text on variability, and you see I mentioned variability, states, metrics. So InfraNodus will connect all of those clusters together, all of those concepts together, because they appear in the same context, in the same paragraph. Obsidian GraphView will not, and there you lose a lot of really interesting structural information, because when you read this text, you actually are connecting those concepts. So this is why by default, InfraNodus GraphView will connect them together, and this is what it says here: link mentions to each other if they're in the same paragraph. So for instance, if we look at the graph of this page here, just this ideograms and variability, and then we switch to the concepts view, because now we choose, okay, we would like to visualize only wikilinks, right? And then we click Save Settings, it will regenerate the graph. You see, we actually have a much denser graph where the concept of variability is not only connected to ideograms and variability, how it would be in the Obsidian graph, but rather to all the different nodes that are used next to variability in this text, right? So this is what allows us to then build the topical clusters. Otherwise, what we would have would be something like this. We would have this text on ideograms and variability, and only the concepts that this text mentions, but no connections between those concepts which already exist inside the text itself. So I find that's a really big letdown on the side of Obsidian not to show these connections, because then you sort of have to recreate them yourself, right? Inside InfraNodus, This is not a problem. They are already connected. If, however, you would like to have exactly the same view as Obsidian, you can also choose here to link mentions to the parent page only, Obsidian style. You see? So here, by default, they're linked to each other, they're in the same paragraph. Then you have an option to link them to the parent page and also even the same paragraph. And then you can link them to the parent page only, so not to each other, like in Obsidian. And then if you click save, look what happens here. You have the main page, and then you have exactly the same sort of limited view that you would have in Obsidian, where it connects those words that are mentioned inside this document only to the parent one. You can actually expand more and see exactly the same part that you see here. You see? So this is how it would work if you would like to use the same approach. I usually like to actually not connect them to the main page. I just like to connect them to each other because I want to see the context of that page. But if you want to have a more of a high-level view, you can actually choose the second option, where it mixes both approaches. It connects it to the main page and also if they're in the same paragraph. So then if you click visualize, you see we'll have the main page and the connections. And then let's say if we would like to see sort of same thing but for the whole folder, right click on the folder, visualize in InfraNodus Graph. We have this setting set up. So you see there we have sort of like the same main nodes as here, ideograms and variability, radical embodied cognitive science. We have that here, you see, as the main node. But then we sort of see the main structure of ideas and also the ideas connected to them. And let's say if we would like to zoom in more on the concept of trauma, for instance, we can click on that. And then if we click here, it will actually jump exactly to this page and then visualize that page here so that we can see how that page content looks like from this high-level graph overview. So this is how it compares to the Obsidian GraphView and how it's different from it. I actually recommend that you leave the default setting where they just link to each other and in the same paragraph. But if you don't want to have concepts visualized, you can just choose wikilinks. But for instance, not many people have wikilinks. They just use Obsidian sometimes to store text files. So in that case, you want to keep it at wikilinks and concepts, which is the default view. And then when you visualize it like this, you have much more contextual information, which is in fact very good for the built-in AI, because then when you go to the gaps view, it contains not only the wikilinks that you highlighted, but also this extra content around them. So then when you click on a gap that you would like to explore, and then you use this button here to generate an insight, it will actually take into account all these different nodes and concepts that exist around those wikilinks also. So it's quite useful because then you just get more context into your graph this way. And just to show you how it works from the quick demonstration that we had in the very beginning, you see it generated a question that links those two clusters together. Then you have two options. You can send it to the chat here if you click here, and then it sends it to the built-in chat, and then the built-in chat inside InfraNodus is going to generate an answer for you, which you can then integrate into your own research, into your own documents, or just ideate with it without polluting your main repository. Or what you can also do is to take this question, copy it here, and then get a terminal plugin for Obsidian, open Claude right here, and then point the same question to Claude, maybe switch it to the auto mode, and then it's going to analyze your whole repository and provide you with an answer based on that question that was generated on the basis of this gap that we identified here. So it's quite useful because you can basically use the insights from this graph in order to generate insights here. And also, let's say if you would like to, for instance, copy this gap to bridge, then you can just copy the gap and then also ask it generate a question based on the gap here. And then it shows you the main topics that are used in this gap. And then Claude will generate a question for you based on this gap as well. So you really can take some of the elements from this graph and integrate them into your AI workflow and use it inside Obsidian directly itself. Right? If you use agentic flows, for instance, we also have an MCP server that you can connect through Claude and then use the InfraNodus MCP server. So in that case, all these graph insights will be available to your LLM automatically instead of you extracting them manually. But actually, I like to use this GraphView in order to extract some of the topics, ideas, clusters. It allows me to sort of steer my attention to the gaps and specific concepts that I have in my text. And then once I choose something I like, and for example, I find it interesting, I can simply copy these concepts here and then send them to my AI prompt. So I'm sort of having much more control over how my LLM is thinking and where I'm steering it. And that gives me an extra layer of observability, which I wouldn't have if I just used the MCP server. So this is how it works in a nutshell. I hope you find it interesting. Let me know if you have any questions about it, if you want me to go deeper on certain aspects of how it works. Also, if you would like to learn more about all the different settings here, if you would like me to make a detailed tutorial on this, I will be happy to do that. And otherwise, also please share your experience using this GraphView plugin or any other GraphView plugins. I would be very curious to know what you use and how you use it, and if you find it actually interesting at all. Thank you.